The morning started like any other at Lakeside Middle School, but everyone could feel something tense in the air. Students walked down the hallway, holding their books close, whispering about the music class that always made someone cry, inside room 12. The piano sat in the center like a giant waiting to swallow another child's confidence. And behind the piano stood Mr. Wallace, the teacher who believed strictness was the only way to teach. Mr. Wallace never smiled. He spoke sharply, he judged quickly, and he always expected perfection. But more than that, he carried a hidden bitterness. A bitterness that made him treat some students as if they didn't belong. Among them was a quiet black girl named Alina. She sat in the back, always trying to stay invisible. Hoping the day would pass without him noticing her, Alina loved music, but she had stopped showing it. She hummed softly at home, but at school she stayed silent because she knew people like Mr. Wallace didn't like seeing her shine. He had never heard her play, but he already believed she had no talent. He judged her before she touched a single key that morning. The class settled in as he scanned the room with cold eyes. Then, suddenly, he pointed straight at her. "Alina, come to the front," he said. His voice sharp like a blade. The room grew quiet. Even her classmates looked away, afraid they might get pulled into his cruelty. Alina stood slowly, her hands shaking as she walked toward the piano. Her heart thumped loudly in her chest. She remembered all the times he talked down to her, the times he ignored her, the times he made her feel smaller than the chair she sat on. She swallowed hard, wishing she could disappear. Mr. Wallace folded his arms as she reached the piano. He wanted to make a point. He wanted to show the class what lack of discipline looked like. "Everyone," he said, raising his chin, "let's see if Alina can play a simple piece." The word simple stung her like fire. The class watched as she sat down, her legs barely able to hold her weight. Mr. Wallace leaned over her shoulder and whispered just loud enough for others to hear. "Try not to embarrass yourself." Alina closed her eyes. She remembered her grandmother's living room, the old wooden piano, and the warm voice that used to say, "Play what you feel, not what you fear." She breathed in, and her fingers rested gently on the keys. The room seemed to fade. The voices melted away and only the piano remained. Then she began to play. Not the simple piece he wanted, not the beginner notes he expected. Instead, a soft, powerful melody flowed from her fingers like a river that had waited too long to be free. The class froze, the room filled with emotion, beauty, and a depth no one expected from the quiet girl in the back. Her music rose and fell like a story. It carried strength, sadness, hope, and fire all at once. Mr. Wallace's smirk slowly faded. He leaned back, stunned. He didn't understand how she could play like that. He didn't understand how someone he dismissed had such a gift. Alina didn't stop. Her fingers danced, her heart poured out, and her fear slowly melted into confidence. For the first time, she wasn't hiding. For the first time. Let everyone see who she truly was. When the final note faded, the room stayed quiet. No one moved, no one laughed, no one whispered. They were all too shocked to speak. Mr. Wallace cleared his throat. Trying to hide his shaken expression, he forced himself to stand tall. But his voice cracked slightly as he said, "Sit down," but everyone could hear the truth. He wasn't in control anymore. Alina had been the one to command the room as she returned to her seat. Every eye followed her, not with pity, not with mocking curiosity, but with awe. Even the students who barely knew her looked at her differently now. They had seen something powerful, something rare, something unforgettable. Lena sat quietly, folding her hands on her lap. She didn't need applause. She didn't need praise. She knew what she had done. She knew she had changed everything. And in that moment, she also knew this was only the beginning. The next day at Lakeside Middle School felt completely different. The halls whispered with excitement, not fear. Students who had never spoken to Alina before were suddenly turning their heads to look at her as she walked past. They didn't laugh, they didn't mock, they didn't ignore her. Instead, they stared, as if they had discovered something they were never supposed to miss. Alina kept her gaze down. She didn't understand the sudden attention. She had spent years blending into the background, wishing to stay invisible so people wouldn't judge her. Now it felt like every footstep echoed with the memory of the melody she played. She didn't know whether to feel proud or scared. In her first class, a girl tapped her shoulder gently. Her name was Mia, a quiet but kind student who usually kept to herself. "I heard you played yesterday," Mia whispered, eyes wide with admiration. "You were amazing," Alina blinked in surprise, unsure how to respond. No one at school had ever spoken to her with respect like that. She simply nodded and tried to smile. But the rumors grew faster than she expected. By lunchtime, the cafeteria buzzed with stories about the quiet girl who shocked the whole class. Some said she played like a professional. Some claimed she made Mr. Wallace freeze for 10 seconds straight. Others whispered that she must have been hiding her talent on purpose. And every version spread like wildfire. Mr. Wallace, however, was not pleased. He sat in the teacher's lounge with his arms crossed, tapping his foot angrily. He didn't like losing control, didn't like being surprised, and he definitely didn't like being embarrassed in front of 30 students. When another teacher walked in and said, "I heard your student outplayed your expectations yesterday," his face grew red. He forced a tight smile, but inside, he felt his pride cracking. How good could she have been? He muttered, trying to convince himself it was nothing. But he knew the truth. He had seen talent, raw and powerful, shining right in front of him, and it terrified him. Meanwhile, Lena sat outside during lunch with her small sandwich. Enjoying the quiet breeze, she thought maybe the attention would fade by tomorrow. Maybe everything would return to normal, but then she heard voices approaching. 3 girls from the advanced music group were walking toward her. They were known as the Piano Trio, girls who practiced for competitions and lived for applause. Their leader, Hannah, stopped in front of Alina with her arms crossed. "So," Hannah said with a mocking smile, "we heard you had a good moment yesterday." Alina swallowed hard, unsure where this was going. "People exaggerate," Alina whispered. "It wasn't that big." Hannah leaned closer, her tone sharp. "Don't pretend to be humble," she said. "We know how this works. You showed off once, now you want attention." Alina shook her head quickly, panic rising in her chest. "That's not true," she said softly. "I didn't want any attention." The girls exchanged glances. Not believing her, they stepped aside, leaving her alone but shaken for a moment. The joy she felt from her music began to crack under pressure. But just when she felt tears gathering, a shadow appeared beside her. It was Mia again. She sat quietly next to Alina, handing her a small juice box. "Don't listen to them," Mia said gently. "They're jealous." Alina looked at her with grateful eyes. It was the first time someone at school stood beside her without expecting something in return. After lunch, the principal made an unexpected announcement. All music students must stay after school today. There was confusion across the classrooms. Even the teachers looked puzzled. Except for one, Mr. Wallace's expression remained unreadable. Alina's heart pounded as she wondered if this had something to do with her. And she was right when the bell rang and the students gathered in the music room. The atmosphere felt heavy. Mr. Wallace stood in front of them, holding a clipboard. His cold eyes scanned the room until they landed on Alina. She felt her breath catch. "Since some students think they can surprise me," said his tone sharp, "we will be preparing for the Winter Music Showcase earlier than planned." He paused, letting the tension rise, "and I will decide who is ready to perform." The room went silent. Everyone looked at Alina. Anna glared at her with anger. Mia glanced at her with worry, and Alina's chest tightened. She didn't want a spotlight. She didn't want drama. She only wanted to play music that came from her heart. But now it seemed she had stirred something deeper, something none of them were prepared for. And the real test was only beginning. The music room felt colder than usual the next morning. Students rushed to their seats, whispering nervously about yesterday's announcement. No one knew what Mr. Wallace was planning, but everyone felt he was preparing something strict, something heavy, something meant to shake the class. Alina sat quietly in the second row, her hands folded on her lap. She wished she could melt into the chair. She didn't want more attention. She didn't want to face the jealous stares, and she definitely didn't want to stand in front of Mr. Wallace again, but fate was not on her side. Mr. walked in with a stack of sheet music. He placed it on the table loudly, making several students jump. "Today," he said sharply, "we will begin evaluating individual skill." The class groaned under their breath. He did not allow laziness, and he did not allow excuses. When he lifted the first sheet and looked around the room, everyone straightened their backs. He scanned the students slowly, his expression unreadable. Then his gaze settled on the one person who tried hardest to avoid his eyes. "Alina," he said, and the room fell silent. "Come forward." Her heartbeat thudded painfully in her chest. She stood, wishing her legs wouldn't shake so much. Mia gave her an encouraging nod as she passed by. But Hannah and her friends watched with small smirks. They were waiting for her to fail. They wanted the magic of yesterday to disappear. Alina stepped toward the piano. She didn't know what piece he chose, and that frightened her more than anything. Mr. Wallace handed her the sheet. The title at the top made her breath hitch. Moonlit Waltz Advanced Level. She had seen older students struggle with it. Even competition players practiced it for weeks before performing. Her hands trembled as she held the paper. She looked up at him, confusion filling her eyes. "This is too hard," she whispered. But he replied coldly, "If you truly have talent, then show it." The class gasped. They recognized what he was doing. It wasn't a test of skill. It was a trap. A way to prove that her performance yesterday was just luck. Alina sat down slowly. The keys felt colder than ever before. Her fingers looked small and fragile against the large black and white pattern. She swallowed hard, trying to breathe steadily. Her eyes scanned the notes, the speed, the jumps. The control needed, it was overwhelming. But then something inside her shifted. She remembered her grandmother's words again. Music is a language of courage, even when you fear the world. Let the piano be your strength. She closed her eyes for a second. She inhaled deeply. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes trembled. They were soft, unsure, almost breaking. A few students exchanged doubtful looks. Hannah smirked. Mr. Wallace narrowed his eyes. He thought she would crash quickly, but she didn't. She steadied herself. Her fingers slowly found the rhythm. The melody began to grow stronger. The room grew quieter as the waltz unfolded. Even the students who doubted her began to lean forward. There was something fragile yet beautiful in her playing. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And honesty had a sound of its own. Halfway through, she stumbled. Her right hand slipped on a fast jump. A sharp note rang out. Gasps filled the room. Mr. Wallace lifted his chin, ready to speak, but she didn't stop. She didn't freeze. She kept going. And that moment changed everything. The mistake didn't break her. It lit something inside her determination. The kind that rises when someone has been underestimated for too long. Her fingers danced again. This time with more courage, more strength, more fire. Each note carried the truth she never said aloud. "I can do this. I am more than you think." The ending arrived with a soft, trembling finish. Not perfect, not flawless, but powerful in a way no one expected. The room stayed silent. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even Hannah looked unsure now. Mia's eyes sparkled with pride. Mr. Wallace stood still. He struggled to hide the shock in his eyes. He had tried to expose her weakness. But instead, she exposed her strength. Something rare, something real, something he could no longer deny. After a long pause, he spoke. "Sit down," he said. But his voice wasn't sharp this time. It carried something new, something uneasy, something almost respectful. As she returned to her seat, her heart still raced. But she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not shame, but pride. Quiet. Warm pride that settled deep inside her chest, and she didn't even realize it yet. But that performance would change her future in ways no one in that room could imagine. The next morning arrived with a strange tension in the air. Students walked into the music room quietly. They weren't whispering jokes. They weren't looking bored. They were watching Mr. Wallace closely. They all sensed something had changed, even if he refused to show it. Mr. Wallace stood at his desk flipping through papers. His jaw was tight, his movements sharp. He acted as if nothing bothered him, but inside, his thoughts were tangled like broken strings on a violin. He had planned to humiliate Alina. He had expected her to crumble. But instead she had risen higher. Much higher than he imagined a quiet, unnoticed girl ever could. He didn't know what frustrated him more, her talent or the fact that he never saw it coming. As students settled into their seats, Hannah whispered to her friends, "She only got lucky yesterday. She can't keep this up." But even her voice lacked its usual confidence. Alina entered the room last. Her shoulders were tense. She wasn't excited about more attention. She wasn't hoping for praise. She only wanted peace. But peace was the one thing she was not going to get. When she walked past, some students smiled at her. Some nodded with respect, others simply stared. They all saw her differently now, not as the girl who sat in the back, but as the girl who survived the hardest tests Mr. Wallace ever gave. Mia waved at her from the middle row. "Sit next to me," she whispered warmly. It was small, but it meant the world to Alina. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel entirely alone. "Mr. Wallace finally cleared his throat, class," he said. "Today we will focus on duet practice." Groans and sighs filled the room. Duets meant teamwork. Duets meant matching timing, rhythm, and breathing. Most students struggled with it. Then he paused, and his eyes shifted toward Alina again. Her heart dropped. She feared another trap. "Another impossible task, Alina," he said slowly. "Come forward." The room fell silent again. Mia squeezed her hand gently. "You got this," she whispered. Alina stood and walked to the front. Every step felt heavy. She didn't know what he wanted, but she prepared herself for the worst. Mr. Wallace picked up another sheet of music. This time it wasn't advanced. It wasn't impossible. It was a duet piece, calm, emotional, and beautifully written. He held it out to her. "You will play this?" he said. Then he turned toward the class and added something no one expected. "And I will play with you." Gasps filled the room instantly. Students exchanged stunned looks. Mr. Wallace never played with students. He never shared a piano bench. He never allowed anyone to match him. For years, he only played alone, yet today, he chose her. Alina's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. She sat at the piano slowly. The bench felt smaller now that someone else was beside her. Mr. Wallace adjusted his sleeves and placed his hands on the keys. "Follow my timing," he said calmly. His tone wasn't mocking this time. It wasn't sharp, it simply sounded serious. She nodded nervously. Their fingers hovered over the keys. Then the room fell completely silent. Not a whisper, not a breath, only waiting. He began with a soft opening. His notes were steady and warm. Then she joined in, her melody wrapping gently around his, two different voices blending into one story. The students watched in awe. No one moved. No one blinked. They could hear the contrast. His playing was precise and controlled. Hers was emotional and full of life. Together, they created something rare. Halfway through the piece, something shifted. Mr. Wallace glanced at her hands. He noticed the way she played each note with feeling. He noticed how she listened carefully to the rhythm. He noticed she wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply playing with honesty, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, something he had forgotten. Respect. Real, genuine respect. Not the kind forced by authority, as the final note faded. The room remained frozen for a few seconds. Then someone whispered, "Wow." Another whispered, "They sound like professionals." Alina looked at her teacher nervously. She waited for criticism. She waited for coldness. She waited for the usual disappointment. But he didn't say any of those things. Instead, he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Soft, thoughtful, almost humbled. "You have potential," he said quietly. But potential means nothing without discipline. It wasn't praise. It wasn't an insult. It was something in between, a beginning. And Alina realized something important. Mr. Wallace wasn't done testing her. He wasn't done challenging her. But he wasn't trying to break her anymore. He was trying to see how far she could go. And this time, she wasn't afraid. The news of Alina playing a duet with Mr. Wallace spread across the school faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, students whispered about it in the hallways. Some talked with excitement, some with disbelief. But others, especially those in the advanced music group, spoke with jealousy burning in their voices. Hannah sat with her friends in the cafeteria, her fork poked angrily at her food. She thinks she's special now, Hannah muttered. She plays one good performance. And suddenly he's treating her like a star? Her friends nodded quickly, feeding her anger, but deep down, even they knew what they saw. Alina had something real, something powerful. Something they couldn't match easily, meanwhile. Alina sat with Mia at a small table near the window. She nibbled on her sandwich quietly, but she could feel eyes on her. Some admiring, some curious, some full of envy. Mia leaned forward and whispered, "You know they're talking about you again?" Alina sighed softly. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said. "I just wanted to play." Mia smiled gently. "That's why it's happening," she replied. People who don't chase attention often become the ones others can't ignore. Alina wished she could believe that. But the pressure around her was growing like a tightening circle. And she felt it every moment she walked through the school doors. When music class finally started, the room felt colder again. Students rushed to their seats. Mr. Wallace entered with a stack of new sheet music. He looked serious, too serious. "Even more than usual today," he announced. "We will begin choosing students for the Winter Music Showcase." A wave of nervous whispers filled the room. Everyone wanted a chance. Everyone wanted to shine. But everyone also knew his expectations were brutal. He raised a clipboard and called names one by one. Students came forward and performed. Some played well, some made mistakes. Some trembled so much they could barely hit the right notes. Then he paused, and his eyes turned to Alina again. She felt her heart thump loudly. "Alina," he said. "You're next." She stood slowly. Her palms were sweaty, her legs shook. But she walked with quiet courage toward the piano. Mia squeezed her shoulder as she passed. "You can do this?" she whispered. Alina sat at the piano. This time, the piece was unfamiliar, but beautiful. A soft, emotional melody with fast turns and gentle crescendos. She breathed deeply, closed her eyes, and began to play. Her fingers flowed over the keys like water. Every note carried emotion, every rhythm carried truth. Her music filled the room with warmth. Even students who disliked her felt themselves pulled into her melody. And then it happened. The door opened quietly in the middle of her performance. Someone stepped inside. It was the school principal. He stood listening with quiet interest. His eyes widened slightly as the melody wrapped around the room. Alina didn't stop. She didn't even notice him. Her world had shrunk into the piano alone. She played with feeling, with honesty, with something deep inside her heart. Something even she didn't fully understand yet. When the last note faded, the room fell silent again. But this silence felt different. Heavier. Full of awe. Even Mr. Wallace didn't speak at first. He looked at her with a strange expression, something between shock and admiration. Hannah's mouth hung slightly open. Her friends stared in disbelief. Finally, the principal stepped forward. "What is your name?" he asked gently. Alina stood from the bench nervously. "Alina," she whispered. He nodded with a warm smile. "You have a gift," he said softly. "Keep nurturing it." The class buzzed in shock as he left the room. Mr. Wallace cleared his throat quickly. "Trying to regain control, that will be all," he said sharply. But even his voice cracked slightly. He couldn't hide what the whole room knew. She had impressed the principal. When she returned to her seat, Mia grinned at her. "You're amazing," she whispered. But Alina didn't feel amazing. She felt scared. The more she played, the more attention she got. And attention brought jealousy, dangerous jealousy. After class, Hannah stopped her at the door. Her eyes cold, her voice sharp. "Don't think you're better than us," she hissed. Alina froze. "I don't," she replied softly. "I never said that." Hannah leaned closer. "But everyone else is saying it," she said bitterly, "and soon. You won't be able to hide behind your sweet little act." Alina stepped back. Stunned, she realized jealousy wasn't fading. It was growing. Turning darker, turning into something that could break friendships. Or create enemies. She walked away quickly. Her heart heavy, her mind confused. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want attention. She didn't want enemies. All she wanted was to play music, but music had now placed her in the center of a storm. And the storm was only getting stronger. The week of the Winter Music Showcase arrived faster than anyone expected. Students rushed through the halls with sheet music tucked under their arms. Practice rooms were always full. The air buzzed with excitement, nervousness, and quiet competition. But for Alina, the excitement came with fear. She knew not everyone was happy about her rising talent. She felt the cold stares, heard the whispers, and sensed jealousy growing like a shadow behind her. Mr. Wallace became stricter as the showcase approached. He assigned longer practices, harder exercises, and even surprise drills. But something had changed in the way he looked at Alina. He no longer saw her as a student. He wanted a break. He saw her as a student who could lift the reputation of the whole program. That realization bothered some students even more, especially Hannah. Hannah spent hours in the auditorium practicing her competition piece. But every time she hit a note wrong, every time her fingers stumbled, every time she remembered the principal praising Alina, her anger grew hotter. "She doesn't deserve this," Hannah muttered to her friends. "She came out of nowhere. She's not even in advanced music." Her friends nodded. But none of them had the courage or talent to challenge Alina directly. One evening after school, Alina stayed late in the music room to practice. The lights were dim, the halls quiet. The old clock ticking softly as she played, her melody echoed gently. Her mind peaceful for the first time in days. Music became her comfort, her escape, her truth. When she finally packed up, she placed her sheet music inside her folder and left it on the piano while she tied her shoelaces. The door behind her creaked open. Footsteps approached. Alina thought it was a janitor, or maybe the band teacher passing by. She didn't turn around. She should have, because those footsteps did not belong to someone harmless. The next morning, she rushed into the music room, ready to practice again. But the second she opened her folder, her heart dropped. The music sheets she needed for the showcase were gone. Every page, every note, everything she had written and practiced. Her hands shook, her breath trembled. She searched her bag again and again. Then the piano stand, then the floor. Nothing. It was all missing, completely gone. Mia ran in a few minutes later. She instantly saw the panic on Alina's face. "What happened?" Mia asked. "My music," Alina whispered. "It's gone." Mia searched with her. But even she knew something was wrong. Someone stole it. And both girls knew exactly who had the motive when Mr. Wallace entered the classroom. He immediately noticed Alina's pale face. "What's the problem?" he asked sharply. Alina swallowed hard. "My sheet music," she said softly. "It disappeared," he frowned. "Be responsible," he snapped. "You should have kept it safe." His tone hurt her, but then something unexpected happened. He walked to his desk, pulled out a spare folder, and held it out to her. "Fortunately," he said, "I kept a copy." Gasps filled the room. Even Mia looked shocked. Mr. Wallace never kept backup copies for anyone. He barely helped struggling students, yet he quietly protected hers. Alina took the folder with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded stiffly. "Do not lose it again," he said, but underneath the strict tone, there was something else, a subtle sign that he believed in her. For the rest of the class, everyone practiced. But Hannah could barely focus when she saw Mr. Wallace hand Alina a backup copy. Her face burned with rage. She had expected Alina to fall apart, to panic, to fail. But instead, the teacher she wanted to impress helped the girl she envied most. At lunch, she slammed her tray on the table. "This is not fair," she hissed. "She keeps getting lucky." Her friends shifted uncomfortably. One of them whispered, "Maybe it's not luck," but Hannah glared, her eyes wild with anger. "She will not take my spot," she said through clenched teeth. "I don't care what it takes." That night, Alina practiced harder than ever. Her fingers hurt, her back ached. Her eyes grew tired, but she kept going. She had been pushed, targeted, sabotaged, but she refused to break, and as the showcase day drew closer, she didn't realize something important. Her biggest challenge wasn't on the piano. It was walking straight into the jealousy of someone who wasn't done trying to destroy her. The Winter Music Showcase night arrived with shining lights. Parents filled the auditorium, teachers stood near the back, students hurried backstage with nervous hands and shaking breath. Everyone wanted to shine, everyone wanted applause. But no one carried as much weight in their chest as Alina did. She clutched her folder tightly, her fingers trembling. She had practiced every moment she could, but the fear of sabotage still lingered like a shadow behind her. Mia stayed at her side. "You're ready," she whispered softly. "You've worked harder than anyone here," Alina nodded. But deep inside, a storm rumbled. Not because she doubted her talent, but because she feared someone wanted her to fail. Badly, terribly, desperately backstage, Hannah stood with her friends. Her face was stiff with jealousy. She kept glancing at Alina with a coldness that could freeze flames. Her friends noticed her shaking hands. But none of them spoke. They knew she was losing control. The showcase began with group performances. Parents clapped politely. A few solos came next. Some students played beautifully. Some stumbled with nerves. But everyone put their heart into it when Hannah's name was called. She stepped onto the stage gracefully. She sat at the piano with confidence. Her fingers danced quickly across the keys. Her piece was sharp, loud, and practiced. But it lacked warmth. It lacked soul. It lacked the feeling that made a listener breathe differently. She finished with pride. The crowd clapped politely. She smiled tightly. But her eyes immediately searched for Alina. She needed her to fail to feel victorious. Then it happened. The host stepped forward and announced, "Next, Alina Johnson." The auditorium became quiet instantly. Mr. Wallace stepped out from behind the curtain to stand at the side. He folded his arms, but the softness in his eyes showed something rare. Hope. Alina walked onto the stage with shaky steps. Her shoes felt heavy, her breathing rapid. The grand piano waited under the spotlight. Huge, intimidating, beautiful, she sat, opened her folder, placed the sheet music gently in front of her, and closed her eyes for a long moment. She remembered every hurt, every insult, every whisper, every jealous stare, every moment someone tried to break her. And then she remembered her grandmother's voice. "Music is truth. Let it speak for you." She lifted her hands slowly, placed them on the keys, and began. The first note was soft and trembling. The second was steadier. Then the melody grew, warm, emotional, full of a quiet strength that filled the room like a rising sun. Parents leaned forward, students froze, even teachers forgot to blink. Her playing carried the story of a girl who had been underestimated, pushed aside, mocked, ignored, but who rose again with courage that no one expected. Halfway through the piece, a sudden movement in the audience startled her. Someone walked down the aisle quickly, the principal. But he didn't interrupt. He simply stood closer. Listening with deep admiration, Alina continued. Her fingers flowed like water over stones. Her heart poured into every note. The melody soared and fell, softened and rose again, like a voice long silenced, finally allowed to speak. Then something happened backstage. Hannah, fuming with jealousy, grabbed the curtain edge and whispered angrily, "She's ruining everything," but her friend pulled her back quickly. "Hannah, stop," she hissed. "Look at everyone there, mesmerized." Hannah looked around, and for the first time, she truly saw what was happening. The audience was not just listening. They were feeling moved, touched, changed. This wasn't luck, this wasn't chance. It was raw, real talent. A kind Hannah could not match, no matter how hard she practiced. Alina reached the final part of her piece. The room held its breath. The notes softened beautifully, like a quiet confession. A soft goodbye, a blooming hope. Her final note hung in the air like a warm echo. And then silence fell, deep, powerful silence. The kind that happens when hearts are full and no one wants to break the moment. Then applause exploded, loud, overwhelming, emotional. Parents rose to their feet. Students clapped with wide eyes. Teachers nodded proudly. Even the principal wiped a small tear from his eye. Mr. Wallace stepped forward, his voice low, his words controlled but sincere. "Well done," he said softly. "No sharpness, no coldness. Just respect." Backstage, Mia hugged her tightly. You did it, she whispered. You really did it. Even Hannah approached, her face defeated, her voice trembling. You're good, she said quietly. Alina didn't gloat. She simply nodded and whispered, thank you. That night, Alina didn't just win applause, she won something much bigger. She earned respect. She silenced jealousy. She found her courage, and most importantly, she discovered the power inside her own music. A power that would never be silenced again.